What are you eating, Jim?
You caught me. Breakfast of Champions, Tootsie Roll.
Oh, okay. You didn't have
one of my favorite candies from way back in the day. I got they sell these little teeny tiny banks, right? Like change banks that you can get in the grocery store that have like 20 of these little midgies in them. And it's a great way to get a quick snack and not have to buy like a gigantic bag of them.
That's right. You're 3 hours ahead when we're recording this. So you're already in time. I just finished my corned beef and cabbage dinner.
Sounds good.
Cool. I love it. I love it.
Happy holidays to you. Haven't talked to you in a minute, so happy holidays.
Thanks. We just get all together. Culturally, my family's never celebrating the traditional ones, but we definitely get together and pig out on food since everyone's off. So I love this time of year. It's my favorite time.
Nice.
To be home and enjoy the fire and all that good stuff. And we actually have rain happening in California and snow, so it's really nice.
Cool. Very cool.
It's very good. Weather's good where you're at. I know the East Coast was getting pounded lately.
Yeah, actually, it's been pretty mild here. I'm in Virginia, and we had it's been mid 40s and 50s most of the last week or so. Rained a little bit today, so it's a little cold right now, but it's supposed to warm up again later in the week. So yeah, the weather's all over the place thanks to global warming. So who knows what's going to happen?
Right, exactly. Well, at least we have retreat and we have things to do indoors like Star Trek Adventures role playing, which is of course why we're here today in episode 6 of Continuing Conversations. That was a cool woo. Hope I didn't talk over your woo. That was really good.
That's all right.
For those who may have just started watching this or listening to it, this is the video cast all about Star Trek Adventures, and it includes talking about our latest releases. Right now, we've been breaking down the Gamemasters guide. We highlight professionals. We're going to be highlighting professionals in the Star Trek Adventures world and talking pretty much about all things Star Trek. I'm Michael Dismuke. I'm a freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures. And also just your all-around geek. And Jim Johnson here. He is a writer, gamer, Star Trek Adventures project manager. I've said you're a popcorn lover 100 times. Are you still a popcorn lover?
You bet. That's my number one go-to snack as much as possible. So it's something I've enjoyed long time in my life. And I am definitely a popcorn lover.
That's good to know. That's really good to know. I'm going to remember that at some point. You probably find every variety out there, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, popcorn is definitely the best thing to do when you're watching movies, which is one type of story. But today we are focusing about Chapter 5 of the Gamemasters Guide about Star Trek storytelling. Why did you think it was important to include this chapter in the book?
Well, Star Trek is storytelling, right? It's a television show. It's a movie series. It's all about story. It's all about the characters first, but it's about the characters doing stuff, right? And that's what the story's all about. So it's been around for 55 years, and there's over 800 episodes now. So there's probably we're closing in on 1,000 hours of Star Trek story. Not to mention all the thousands of novels and comic books and video games and every other kind of story out there. So it's Star Trek storytelling. It's been around for a long time. And I think, while it is a science fiction setting, there's a very specific way of telling a Star Trek story, and especially in a role-playing game context. And I wanted to devote a chapter to that, not so much to tell people how to do it right, but just how to do it well.
Yeah, I mean, there's some really good treasures and tips in here. So we're going to go ahead and start reviewing them now. Sure. Again, first, anybody this is your first time playing Star Trek Adventures, or even more so, your first time game mastering, there's some highlights in here I wanted to really point out. One thing, let's just start off describing the difference between a campaign and a standalone mission. Let's start with that piece, Jim. And why is that important that you feel that we had to define that in this chapter?
Yeah, and I guess we want to aim this at the new GM, right? Because we don't want to frighten them away right away, right? So, like, I mean, any RPG, any role-playing game, any tabletop role-playing game that you're playing online or at the table with your friends, like there's a couple of basic ways of doing it, right? You can do a one-shot, which is you get together for a few hours, you tell one discrete story and you're done. Whether it's like a convention module or it's a one-off adventure or it's just a quick get-together, whatever. That's a standalone single mission adventure for that. You do in one night. There's a way you can do a single adventure over several sessions. Like maybe it takes you 3 or 4 sessions to do one of our published missions or another module of some sort. And then a campaign is where you're actually stringing a whole bunch of these together week after week or session after session, whatever your time frame is to get together. And if you think about it in the TV sense, like Next Gen, DS9, the original series, those are, in this concept, those are campaigns, right? The original series was a campaign of 3 seasons and 79 episodes. So, if you were thinking of all those characters being player characters, the Game Master took those 7 player characters through a campaign that lasted 3 seasons. And then actually, I guess they came back for a bunch of one shots. if you think the movies are like cinematic stories, right? So, and then Next Generation, of course, was a long-term campaign of 7 seasons. DS9 7 seasons, so on and so forth. So the big difference is, a single mission, single episode, very, very short, very self-contained. Campaigns can go as long as you and your players can stand it, right? Basically, as long as you have the storytelling chops for it.
Yeah, don't want to intimidate people either, because you can take what was a campaign, like say, for instance, you mentioned TNG or Voyager, and you could still treat them like standalone missions in that maybe you only have time to get together with your friends once a year. The characters well, do a standalone mission with those characters. So this chapter is a really good chapter because if you read it, you're not going to be so overwhelmed if it's your first time putting together your game. Another thing that we put on 126 was about mission modification. So I know, I've seen it happen where somebody gets a module for the first time and they kind of get stuck to it like glue, and they don't know what to do. But this chapter here, you talked about ways we could, well, I actually wrote it, but you put it in the book. What are some of the highlights you found about the mission modifications that people need to do when they grab a module or they grab a campaign book?
Yeah, and so that's kind of getting at why we built this chapter, why we wrote this chapter, right? Is that Star Trek is a little different in that, there's other RPGs out there, of course, where you can buy a pre-written campaign or pre-written module and make some, or just run it pretty much as is. Like take your group of player characters, run it, you're done. And just as an example, I love Dungeons and Dragons. You can buy any pre-made Dungeons and Dragons, module with whatever group of characters you have, and pretty much run them through it without doing a whole lot of modification to the module because it's D&D, right? I'm sure some people out there are going to be very frustrated at me saying that, but by and large, you don't have to make a lot of modifications to it because your archetypal characters can do stuff and it's not really dependent on it. Whereas with Star Trek, it's all about the characters, right? And there's not a single Star Trek module out there that can predict what any given game group is going to be able to bring to the table, right? So you've got to make some modifications to it. You got to make some sort of revisions to it to make it fit your group of characters, if not fit your campaign. So if you're running a one-off or a one-shot episode, or you're running for convention or something, you really don't have to do any modification really, other than just adapt it for who's at the table. Like if you have 4 player characters at your table and you've got a chief medical officer, a security officer, an engineer, and a captain, and there's a big thing in the pre-written episode for the chief flight officer to do, then just make that modification. That's not difficult, right? That's just making sure you're keeping everybody entertained who's there. But as you get into it, you may need to make more extensive modifications, and that's not necessarily a fault of the writer writing the pre-written module. It's just that there are tens and maybe even hundreds of thousands of gaming groups out there right now playing Star Trek Adventures, and there's no possible chance anybody's gonna be able to write one that's going to be custom fit to everybody. You've got to make a little bit of modifications to it. So go ahead.
Yeah, so we put a little formula in here to do that. We're talking about verifying your era, confirming your scene locations, adjusting your non-player characters, and actually focusing on the mission objectives. And when I was thinking about it, I was thinking about jazz music. I love jazz. And most jazz players, it's not like classical music where you have to be a perfectionist and hit every note. You get a chord structure. Now that chord structure is just going to play underlined. And if you're given a clarinet or a piano or a guitar, you're going to play your own notes along that chord structure, and it all comes together. These modules are designed the same way. Just look at the beats. We call them the beats or the scenes, and say, okay, I can adapt that by tweaking this character and changing the year. And there aren't phasers available at this time in my era because I'm playing an early era. And I actually go through and highlight what I can use, and then I back away from the module because it may not fit every piece of it. But I get enough of the flavor that my players are like, oh yeah, I played that module. I met the major characters. I hit that major plot line. And this box on 126 kind of talks about doing that.
Yeah. The only other, great synopsis. The only other thing I'd add is that about the era, like if you're a new GM to the game and you're checking out some of the pre-written adventures that are out there, whether they're in the books, the two adventure books, or any of the PDFs that we've released, don't feel shy about using something that's not in the era you're playing, right? Like if you're playing an original series campaign, by all means, check out the Next Generation era adventures, because they're pretty. Even though the writer wrote it with the intention of it being in the next gen era, for the most part, everything can be modified either forward or backward in the timeline. And for the most part, I don't think there's anything that we've published over the last 4 years that can't be, picked up wholesale and dropped into a different era with minor modifications. I think that's just Star Trek. Good storytelling is good storytelling, no matter what era you're playing in. So don't let the set dressing fool you, right? Don't let the layout fool you that even though it looks like next gen, that you can't use it, because of course you can use it. You just have to make a little work to make it work.
Yeah, I don't even trip about the era. Honestly, I know I've played all over the place with my group, and they can't tell the difference. I'm grabbing major plot lines, or man, I love that scientific concept, and I want to pull that into my game, which is. Speaking of which, as a game master, you're building the outline for the game, and you may have in your mind how the story is about to play out and how you think the characters should go. And we actually talk about railroading in this chapter. And what's railroading for someone who's a new game master, and why do we want to avoid it?
Yeah, well, it's interesting is there was a recent conversation online about railroading, and the person who posed the question was like, what's railroading? I don't know what railroading is. And they got like 40 different answers. And I was like, wow, boy, everybody has an opinion on it. But in my opinion, anyway, railroading is where, as a game master, you're running your players through an adventure. And for the most part, like what they do really doesn't matter, because you have them on a path that they're going to go from A to B to C to D to E to the finale. And no matter what choices they make, they're still going to get there. It reminds me of a lot of the older video games, especially like first-person shooters, that literally you could see the rails. Like there was only so much you could explore within the setting or within the level or whatever. And you're like, you were going to go from point A to point B to point C. And that's a fine, game concept for certain circumstances. But for an RPG, when you're at the table and you want your characters to have agency, right? And you want to have agency. You want to go into that episode feeling like you made a difference, like you made a choice and you made a meaningful difference. Railroading just kind of, honestly kind of sucks, right? Because you're like, I could have not shown up and it still would have happened, right? It's almost like the GM wrote a novel and you just happen to be along for the ride, right? And that's just not a lot of fun.
Yeah, when I was like 13 or 15 years old, starting, to GM, I definitely railroaded because I gotta see this fight between these two characters, and then one dice roll and my character gets knocked out in one thing, and I sat there like, we all experience that. And if you do, as a game master, actually get a little stuck, maybe they twist your plot a little bit. Claim a bathroom break. Say, excuse me, I gotta, go to restroom break. Sit there on the toilet and be like, okay, I got to rework this really quick. That's not an unusual thing to happen to game masters, right? Cool.
Michael, it's funny you mentioned that. I wish, now in retrospect, I wish we had put that into the book somewhere, because bathroom breaks have saved me on countless occasions in games. And it was just like, yeah, you're right. You're literally just sitting there like, okay, the players did this. I've got 2 minutes to work something out here. And then you just spin your brain, you figure it out, and then you get back to the table, and then you do something amazing. And the players have no idea, right? They just think it was just part of the whole thing. And you're like, yeah, you can sit back and go, yeah, I made it work. But
and remember, you're the director and the co-writer of this RPG. Yep. If you had a really good idea, you can bring it back later. I had, and literally this is true to my game, I had an idea that came up about 2 years ago. I thought we were going to hit, and we didn't get a chance to hit it till just recently. And it was just as good. And so, patience pays off.
Absolutely.
So the last 3 points that were in, well, there's a lot of gold in here, by the way. I just reread it today, this chapter. I was like, wow, I forgot we put that in there.
Yeah.
But what I want to do is talk about the 3 types of campaigns people can build. And this would be the mission scale storytelling, the season scale storytelling, and the campaign scale storytelling. And the reason I want to highlight this is because for new game masters coming in, do it the right way. Like, my point being, like, don't build this big epic in your mind and people are only going to commit for one game. Mm-hmm. But let's talk about the definition between these 3 so the game masters can make the right selection going in. What's mission scale storytelling?
Yeah. Okay. So just the basic definitions first, then I guess we'll go into more detail. So mission scale is just you're looking at it one mission at a time. What's the one episode you're going to run? What's the one adventure? What's the one mission brief or standalone adventure? Or like what's the one single story that you're going to tell with your group? Whether it's one session, or maybe it takes you 2 or 3 sessions, whatever. So that's mission scale, just one discrete little moment, right? One episode from the TV series, any one episode. And then you get into season scale, and that is where you're taking several episodes and you're stringing them together into a quote unquote season. However long that season is up to you and your group. It's up to the GM to some extent, because the GM is the one committing the bulk of the time and effort to preparing it. So if you have something that you think you could, structure into a season, a great example would be Star Trek Discovery's second season, right? That was a very discrete story that they told from beginning to end over the course of 15, 16 episodes or something. And it had a very clear through line. And that was one discrete story, that one season. There was a lot of subplots and stuff that hung off of it. But overall, season 2 is pretty much a standalone season that you could, call a story.
And I'd like to compare that to the living campaign, which could be considered a season scaled storytelling. So your friends may just get together to do the living campaign, which is in the Shackleton Expanse Guide. That could be one season, right?
It could be, yeah. I mean, I guess it depends on how the group wanted to run it. And I'm sure we'll talk about the Shackleton Expanse in future episodes. But I think the especially the book that just came out. I mean, you could a GM with some aspirations could probably turn that into a campaign, or even multiple campaigns, right? Depending. And that gets to the
campaign? Third. Separate the season versus the campaign for me.
Yeah, and we'll cover that one too. So the first scale, of course, is mission scale, and then the season scale, which is one season's worth of episodes that tell a discrete story, and then a campaign is that blown up even further, where you're planning multiple seasons, multiple storylines. You've got stuff happening from beginning to end, and somehow, well, actually, they don't necessarily have to link, but it's all one big story. So it if you look at Next Generation, that is a 7-season campaign. Original series is a 3-season campaign, plus the animated series, if you want to include that, plus the movies. Discovery is currently in its 4th season of its campaign. So a campaign is just a much bigger, broader story. And I guess if I was going to caution GMs about anything, is it's great to have big ideas and to have these grand expectations of where you want your campaign to be, but realize that in the real world, people have conflicts and people move and things change, and people drop in and out of campaigns all the time, or games all the time. So if you're hinging everything on your say your captain player character, and they get sick of the game and they quit, then what happens to your campaign, right? All your hopes and dreams have crashed. And I'm sure every game master has had that kind of moment before, right? So
now we need to brag, but without intimidating new game masters. So Jim, your longest campaign, how long did it last in real time?
45 episodes over 3 real years. So it took 3 years for us to go through 45 episodes, and those 45 episodes were broken into 15 episode seasons. So we did 3 seasons over 3 years.
I beat you. Wow, I didn't think I was going to. So mine was...
that's my longest one. I mean, I've been doing Star Trek gaming forever, but one discrete campaign was 3 years.
Okay, so my Star Trek Adventures is now, I think we're in the 40s also, and we started back in 2018. But my longest was a Marvel Superheroes that ran for 28 years with the same people.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and I can't even count how many episodes. I had to write I volumes of story.
Yeah.
But not to intimidate new game masters, but just saying, if you build something really good and have a good crew, it's a life-changing experience. It's
really absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, cool. So thank you for defining those 3 types of storytelling. Again, that was mission scale, season scale, and campaign scale. Again, this chapter has a lot about how to construct it. I'm just going to highlight a couple things in here that I thought were gold, Jim, and maybe you can then highlight yours. One of the things I really enjoyed was talking and teaching new game masters how to frame the action. And how I picture it was, I do American Sign Language. I'm fluent in American Sign Language, and the grammatical structure of American Sign Language is very play driven. And what I mean by that is you set the actors here, you paint the scene, you talk about what color everything is, you set the tone with your hands, and then you basically go action, and then everything starts moving. And then the hands kind of direct and drag players across the story. And I felt that this chapter encapsulated the same thing about set the scene, and then everyone ready to go? Action. You have any questions before we start? What color is that? Or who's standing where? You're good? Action. And then you go into it. So I thought that was a really good chapter there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know you're not doing this intentionally because I know you, but I think you wrote most of that chapter.
No, I didn't actually. I didn't write that one at all.
Didn't you? I thought you did.
No.
Gosh, was that me? God, I can't even remember now who wrote what. It blends all together, but I was confident you had written a good chunk of this. I think you and I were fighting over this chapter a little bit.
I think we did. I'll point out the parts I did right, but this definitely was not me, and maybe that's why I was so impressed.
It's great advice, whatever it is. But no, I don't have anything to add other than to say I agree with you completely that framing the action and then getting into it is really important. And I think that's something for new GMs and especially existing GMs is really important to keep in mind for Star Trek Adventures specifically is that the entire game and a lot of the mechanics are really built around scenes and encounters. It's like if you watch one of the Star Trek episodes, any Star Trek episode, you'll see it's traditional television, right? It's scene after scene after scene after scene after scene, and they do different kind of cuts from one scene to another scene. There's transitions, there's scene transitions, there's beats, and there's moments of where like the scene's done, you move on to the next one. You don't kind of walk through the motions to the next scene. You cut it, you move, you cut it, you move. And a lot of that
piece I did write. Yeah. Now that piece about cut scenes, I did actually. I do remember writing that portion because I had to do a little research on how cinematic directors choose cut scenes, and that's on page 135. And that was actually fun. And I've been employing it since I had to write it. I've been really employing it with my team, and it has heightened the suspense and tension of each scene, which has been really cool.
Yeah, but if you're paying attention, players and game masters, a lot of the mechanics in the game, like especially some of the talents, are really dependent on to the end of the scene or in the next scene or to the end of the scene or whatever. So, Nathan, when he built this system, he was really careful to say, look, the scene is the most important building block of your episodes, right? Make those scenes effective and happening. And that's where all the mechanics are playing into it, including momentum and determination and threat, right? Like your momentum, players carefully spending momentum can manipulate how that scene plays out, right? And so, keep in mind, if anything, read the chapters on scenes because as a player, the more you understand how a scene works, the better the episode's going to flow, and it'll make your GM's life much easier.
Agreed. And part of that too is mentioned in here is about really how to adjust the rules to fit the scene also. And I'm trying to figure, sometimes in the modules, suggested tasks are written down, like do this, roll that, pair that. But are you saying we have to adhere to that all the time? No. What was the point of this chapter?
I falling over my words here. It was really just don't feel like you have to be chained to the mechanics, right? I mean, yes, it's a game, but it's a role-playing game, and this whole system is really one big massive toolkit, and use the tools that you need to use in the moment. Like if traditionally, or if like the rules as written say do it this way, but it just doesn't fit the moment that you're in, just do what works and make it work. And tell your players we're gonna let this one glide.
Yeah, here's a common question that I'll get from my players. We'll say, okay, I need you to do, a reason plus engineering task difficulty 2. And a player will say, can I use con instead of engineering? Because I think I would know about the engines because I'm a pilot. I'm like, okay, yeah, go ahead. It's no big deal, or can I apply this focus? And I'm like, well, how does that apply? And they come up with a reason why this particular focus would apply in this situation. I'm like, okay. I'm a very yes and kind of, game master unless it's a total conflict. And so as new game masters, don't be such a stickler with the rules. Give them flexibility to encourage the creativity of your players is the point I got from that piece.
Yeah. Because the last thing you want to do, I mean, this is true for any game, the last thing you want to do is have a really cool scene flowing and have your players invested in it and excited, and then have everything grind to a halt because you have to go flip through a book to find rule on page 236 or whatever. It's like, just, make it up. And if you get it wrong, it's okay. They'll forgive you. Just, after the show's done, say, oh, by the way, we got this rule wrong. We'll fix it next time. Right. Just, go with the flow and be willing to be creative. Right. So
the plot is more important than perfection.
Yeah. And then having fun at the game table is even more important than the plot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good. Cool. So I thought, speaking of plot, again, there's a really good example of an outline that a game master might write in order to prepare for their game. Again, not writing down every minute detail, but having a general outline, which is cool. And then in the chapter on season scale storytelling, we talk about plot hooks. Mm-hmm. I did not write this section, so you must have written it. I don't know. But let's talk about the different types of plot hooks that are highlighted in this chapter.
Yeah, I mean, there's and another writer wrote this. Jack Geiger wrote a lot of this, and I incorporated it. Plus, some of my own thoughts on this. But there's so many different and this all harkens over to not just fiction writing, but also screenplay writing in general, right? I mean, hooks are important for storytelling. And especially for RPGs, because your characters bring hooks, and your story brings hooks, and the environment they're in brings hooks. And you got active hooks, passive hooks, subplots, sidebars. There's just all kinds of little narrative tricks and hooks that you can bring into a game that get the players interested and invested in what's happening, that are either directly related to them and their characters, or related to something else that maybe is important to them. And just by manipulating those hooks, you can get different levels of involvement from different characters. And I think this really harkens to why I think it's important to have your entire group go through the life path together at session 0, because as you work through that life path, every single step of the way is an opportunity for you to put a hook in. And for a smart game master would look at those and say, oh, this person did this in their early life. That's a hook I can drop into an episode at some point. And if the players are paying attention, they're going to catch it. And I'll get them hooked, and then that carries into the story.
Good. So maybe for those who aren't familiar with the screenplay terms, we could use maybe motivation or triggers, right? Something that will kind of pull the person in. And as a game master, you'll find ways to do that. For instance, if one of your players is a botanist and you're trying to have them go down a certain direction in the forest, why not have them spot a rare flower why would it exist on this planet? Yeah. Just something from their past to make them take that left turn you need to do. You don't tell them, you decorate the scene, and maybe you can drag them into the scene.
Right. Yeah. And for the newer game masters, I would say subplots, sidebars, hooks, you don't necessarily need to worry about those if you're running a one-off, or if you're running a single episode or something. It's not that critical, because you're not going to go anywhere with it. If you're not planning on continuing the story into multiple episodes, then it's not a big deal. But if you're a game master looking at running a season-long story or a campaign, then subplots and sidebars, man, those are the meat and potatoes that you can start dropping in, because you can run a scene in an episode, right? And you've got your main scene, and they're trying to solve a problem. You could drop a hook in there and just have it be just like a passing mention, or a character who happens to walk by or something, and you're like, oh, what was that? That's kind of interesting. But then you get on with the main plot, And then 2-3 episodes later, you can bring it up again, and the players are like, "Oh, wait a minute, we remember that from a while back," and that's because you were dropping those seeds in as you were going.
And I'll encourage too. I could write a whole story about a whole chapter on this, but don't trust the players to remember what you wrote. And it's not insulting. It's just they have lives, and we as writers love our stuff more than anybody else does. We're our biggest fans, right? And critics. And so oftentimes when I bring back one of those points, like you said, another character coming by, since I play by Discord, which is in writing, I will actually set, this is the person who was seen 2 episodes ago. And coincidentally, they passed by and they're wearing something different. I actually set that up. So I don't just put the point that so-and-so walked by. I as a game master in the universe, I fire their synapses to what happened before. And I've seen that that's been a really good way to get people like, oh, I do need to pay a little bit more attention to what's going on around.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, cool. So that was a lot in here. Anything else in this chapter before we wrap up that you wanted to highlight in here? There's so much gold. I mean, you can't read the whole thing verbatim. So
yeah. No, I think we hit the highlights. We hit the key stuff. I mean, there's just a lot of information. I tried to put as much as in here as I could. And I was really inspired. Like one of the gold standards for Star Trek RPGs was the narrator toolkits that Last Unicorn Games put out for the original series game, the next gen game, and the DS9 game. Those were really well written toolkits directly aimed at narrators or game masters. And those are what, 20 something years old now. And there hasn't been something better specifically for Star Trek since then. And I was like, this is an opportunity for us to do something really good and cool. I don't know if it's better. I'll leave that up to the fans to decide. But I think this was an opportunity for us to really hone in on like what makes Star Trek Adventures different, and how can you tell stories with this game system to really bring Star Trek to your table. And hopefully we did a good job. I tried to drop in as many. Like you were saying, those nuggets of gold. Because I've been doing this for 30 some years now, and I know you've been doing it for a while. And just wanted to give new and experienced game masters just as much stuff to think about going forward.
Hey, I have to say, like I said, I read it fresh again today. I read it fresh again today. I'm like, I got to remember to incorporate that. I mean, this is really, as you said, masters of game mastering coming by with their best practices to create emotion, drama-driven stories. So for seasoned game masters, new game masters, it's one of my favorite chapters now in the book. So really good. And of course, as we want to in every episode of Continuing Conversations, we got to do shout outs. One of the shout outs we want to do today is to one of the game shops at Al Spader, one of my players and also one of our writers for Star Trek Adventures. He did a shout out for Jetpack Comics out of Rochester, New Hampshire. They've been in business for 15 years and he's been running tabletop sessions there for 7 years, and of course, including Star Trek Adventures in that. So let's get a big shout out to Jetpack Comics in New Hampshire. And what about you, Jim? You want to give us some shout outs, our normal shout outs?
I think the usual right now. I think the last couple of months have been busy with the production of various and sundry things. So I'll say thank you. Actually, you know what? We haven't. I thank the usual suspects every episode. So how about I thank everybody at? And I'm totally going to ruin the pronunciation, but Standard 2 is the Lithuanian publisher, printing house that does most of the printing for the Star Trek Adventures game. They consistently put great product together. So I wanted to say thank you to them for all, and their entire team for all the hard work that they do. Year in, year out, not just on Star Trek Adventures, but like literally everything that Modiphius prints that's at least in book format. Like a lot of the other stuff comes from China and other manufacturers around the world. But Standard 2 in Lithuania, thumbs up. Great work.
Let me give you a backup on that. The Shackleton Expanse, I've been digesting it for 2 months. I finally this week got the book in the mail, and flipping through the feel of the pages, there's nothing like hard copies. So thank you to Standard 2. I hope I pronounced that correct also.
Me too. I hope so.
Well, good. Great episode of Continuing Conversations, Jim. When we come together next time, boy, we're going to have a chapter on main engineering, reviewing chapter 6 of the GM Guide. So everyone, thank you again for tuning in. IDIC, Infinite Diversity, Infinite Combinations.
Peace and long life.